think we're all lost. Nobody has the answers, right? It's why churches are so popular. I think, Amanda, honestly, the way to manage our feeling of being lost is how big a piece of that feeling are you going to give in your day, in your life, right? It's always going to be there. You're always going to realize it's just you, right? You're born alone, you die alone. Along the way, you will have partners and loves and friends and all these people who assuage it. But eventually you come back to being like, damn, it really is me. And so if you can keep it in its manageable space, don't ignore it because it is real, then I think we'll probably all do just fine because nothing's perfect.
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinth.
Ashleigh Banfield has a story.
What happens when you've made it? When you're standing at the top of your field, and suddenly you're cast out with no explanation. Ashleigh Banfield has reported from war zones, survived a close call on 9/11, and spent decades on the front lines of journalism. But her most disorienting journey didn't come from the chaos of the battlefield. It came from the quiet betrayals of trust. In today's episode, Banfield opens up about being exiled from the classroom, rejected by her media family, and betrayed in love. But she also talks about resilience, reinvention, and how to keep skiing downhill fast, even when you know you might catch an edge and fall flat on your face.
I'm a broadcaster of now 37 years.
Whoa.
I know.
You don't look it.
God bless you. It's smoke and mirrors, honestly, and great makeup. But yeah, I've been at this right out of college. I started day one, got my degree and right into it. And I have been all over the world. Started my career in Canada. I emigrated to the U.S. Literally during the OJ trial in 95. Eventually made my way up to New York and network news and ended up in the middle of 9/11 as a victim and a reporter all at the same time. Was shipped out overseas 9 days later, was a war correspondent for a year in every zone where you've heard of a war headline. I was probably there. Came back and started into more legal justice beat coverage instead of war or politics. And then eventually got fully immersed at Court TV on trial coverage. And then it sort of has blossomed from there into trial, law and justice, and true crime. And that's really what I've been doing for the last, I want to say, 18 years. It's been pretty focused. And that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. All right. Well, it sounds like you've had many adventures and potential misadventures over the course of that time period. When have you felt the most lost, though?
All the way through. You know what, Amanda? That's a really, really good question. No one's ever asked it. And I think it puts us into real thinking mode about who we are and how we got here. But I can tell you firsthand, I have always felt a little adrift. I have always wondered, who can I ask about this? I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. I'm not sure about this. Is this a terrible decision? Is it a great decision? How do I soothe? And in all those times, I never really found exactly the right guru. You know, I have mentors, a couple of them who are professional and have helped me through certain, silos of life, and career. But generally speaking, I don't know how many other people feel that way. I don't know how many other people sort of feel like, damn, it's just me out here.
Yeah, I have encountered a lot of people who have felt like they suddenly found themselves in a life that they weren't expecting. And so they started to ask, like, how did I get here? Am I really the protagonist of my own life, like I like to think that I am? Or am I the pawn in someone else's game? Like, what is going on? What made you feel adrift?
I think every decision. Let me go deep here. As a kid, I think today I'd have been diagnosed as severe ADHD. Back then, I was just a brat and obnoxious, and teachers who couldn't handle me just kicked me out and made me stand in the hall. I stood in the hall more than I remember being in the classroom, which is, I think back on it, that was normal for kids that were difficult. And it became my normal. But I think about it now, like, my God, who does that? You know, who just washes their hands of a kid and tosses them out because it's easier, you know?
Right.
And they just did that. It was the teacher's normal too. They had no training. I don't think anyone really knew anything better. It was the 70s.
They had 30 other kids in the room they had to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. And they had no knowledge of developmental, you know, disabilities or disorders or even mental illness. Really, there was just nothing. There was things weren't spoken of like that. Almost as though they didn't exist as opposed to being avoided. I don't think they just knew anything about it. And so brat was the easiest. Punishment was the go-to. So maybe that's where my general feeling of being adrift stems from, because I was just kind of always alone in that, like, what is wrong with me?
Right. Why can't I sit and focus? Yeah.
Yeah. And also, why am I cut from the herd all the time? And so maybe that just sort of was my foundation for lots of decisions in life. Like, well, you are different and you are weird, and, you don't always follow the same path as everyone else, whether by choice or not. And so maybe that's why, gosh, I wish I just had, a roadmap, or at least, a life mentor to sort of get me there.
Yeah. Ugh, that's so unfortunate. I mean, you've opened a can of worms with me right now, because my mom is a career, like, her entire career was spent in being a public school teacher. And I grew up with being the privilege of having a school teacher mom who could support me in my own education, inside and outside of the courtroom. Or it's the courtroom.
Both, right?
The classroom and the courtroom.
Right.
But like, I also was predisposed to adapt well to a classroom environment. Like, I very often did not struggle in class because I was already a little bit ahead of people in my class. And so what the teacher would do with me is, instead of put me out into the hallway, they would just give me a book and say, Amanda, read. I'm going to have to teach everybody else. And so, like, that was my experience. And I remember, like, thinking about just the question of raising my own children and thinking, why is it that all children are taught in the same way? Because it seems to me like some people could have benefited from some more stimulation. Other people could have benefited from different styles of teaching. Like, you might have benefited from something that was more like hands-on, or that involved more movement. I think that's a lot of reasons why some ADHD kids end up, like, having a difficulty focusing, because they need to use their body to interact with the world, and they're not allowed to. They're
bringing everything in, right?
Yes.
Like, I remember hearing, and I grew up in Winnipeg, so go north of North Dakota and get colder. And so I grew up in a very cold and bleak environment. And I remember hearing the heaters in the classroom going tick, 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 tick. And I couldn't stop hearing it. So now, as I learned, in raising my own two children about special needs, like, oh God, that was me. Without question, that was me.
Got it. Okay, so I can definitely see how you would feel lost in school, because you literally are given a no place to exist. The hallway is like, you don't have a seat, you don't have a say, you don't have a voice. You're just outside in the hallway. Has that manifested itself in different ways at other moments of your life?
Yeah. And by the way, just to sort of like pull on that thread of the classroom a little bit more for a second, because like, I think back on this and it's like criminal. The fifth grade teacher, she decided that I'd been out in the hall so often, maybe this was becoming a problem with the school system, whatever it was. She chose instead to configure the classroom in a horseshoe. Her desk would face an open horseshoe of kids, and their desks touched, right? Mm-hmm. They were all contiguous. My desk was outside of the horseshoe in the far back reach of the classroom, in the corner by the entrance to the coat room. And so not only was I outside the herd at all times, that's where I lived in the classroom, it was like an additional humiliation every single time everybody lined up for recess, because they would line up and walk by me going to the coat room, like looking down, like, oh, look at you. So yeah, I think all of that, the hallway, the classroom configuration, all that manifests itself a lot of times in me thinking, do I belong? Am I ever really a part of this? Do I really belong at this network? I feel like this is my forever home. Is it? Or is this my family? Or am I gone tomorrow? I've never really felt much like I belong anywhere. So maybe through resilience, I don't know, or necessity, just found my way being a visitor of friends groups. I was visitors of all friend groups. I never had my own friend group. I visited. I had one or two good friends, but I didn't belong to any group. And I was really good as a visitor. I was pretty much accepted as a visitor all the time.
Right.
Never felt like I was part of the sleepover, though.
Huh. Interesting. And you say that, like, is that something that you still carry with to this day? This idea that,
sure.
like, even the groups that you belong to, do you really belong to them?
Oh, sure. I think of it all the time, actually. I think of it all the time. I'm going to tell you the most egregious sort of example of this for like pain and suffering in terms of just emotional pain and suffering of belonging. Because we've all been through a lot. You've been through a hell of a lot more. Nobody should come on your podcast and say, woe is me.
No, I fully embrace woe is everyone. So what is your woe is me?
So my little woe compared to your massive woe is I worked for NBC. I remember getting the job there, and it was the biggest feather in my cap. I got hired there in 1999. They had launched MSNBC. They were going to give me a 3-hour show there. They did. They put me on Dateline. I was a host of the Today Show as a fill-in. I just did all this great stuff, right? I had my own show. Eventually, I had a 3-woman show on MSNBC that morphed after 9/11 into my own primetime show at 9 p.m. Like,
wow.
It was like I had arrived, right? But even before those successes at NBC, the minute I walked in the door at 30 Rockefeller Center, I was like, this is it. This is where I want to be carried out in a box. This is where I'm going to live forever. I found my forever home. I love this so much. I feel like I'm a part of the family, or at least I feel like it's going to be me as a part of the family. And they tossed me out on my ass, 3 years later. And I remember the feeling wasn't just losing a job. It really wasn't. It was being rejected by what I loved and what I thought loved me. And I've never gotten over that, for sure. I've never, ever gotten over the feeling of being thrown out of that family.
What were the circumstances of that?
Well, that's been covered before. It's sort of like I want to say it's possibly political. It's possibly professional jealousies. I never got an answer. No one ever told me why
that sucks.
I was being tossed out. I always asked. I certainly didn't sniff coke off a hooker. It wasn't like that. I did nothing wrong, which is usually why you get, cut from the hurt so fast. You do something. But it was the Iraq War. And things were very political in the U.S. I was overseas. I had been in Afghanistan and covering, not only the Afghanistan campaign, but also Gaza, West Bank, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. These were all the places where bang, bang was happening and I was traveling. And what I was learning was what the Arab Street was like. And Americans don't really know what the Arab Street is like because we don't really follow a lot of international news, certainly not from the international perspective. And so my broadcast was very much like, I'm here in name country. This is what the people are doing and saying. And either that became unpalatable in an increasingly conservative, jingoistic America during the Iraq War.
I think there are 3 things you can do. One, you can follow the Democrats' point of view, which is to withdraw on a timetable, which is exactly the wrong policy, very injurious to the interests of this country.
Iraq is getting better, and Americans do want us to win in Iraq.
People say, we didn't have enough troops, maybe we should have more troops, blah, blah, blah. I think we're fighting 2,000 years worth of history.
Right. How dare you humanize these people?
and how dare you give the other side? And that doesn't, Fox News is next door killing it in the ratings by saying, we got one, we killed one, we're good, raw America. And so maybe MSNBC at the time decided we need to get more conservative and we can't have this war correspondent out there showing, the Arab perspective. And from my point of view, it wasn't a liberal, I wasn't thinking politics. I was just, this is my content. I got it because I'm here. This is what they're saying. What else do you want me to do? I can't interview a prime minister of Britain. I'm not there. I can interview a prime minister here in Pakistan. So anyway, So that might have been part of it. And also there were some professional jealousies of very high up people who saw headlines of me being the big star. Like rising star. I was front page of the television section in the New York Post, full page, rising star. She's the future. And here are all these other people who've been working at NBC, say, for 25 years, who nobody knows their name, and even some who might have been even higher who were negotiating contracts. So there's some talk about that being part of it. But no one ever gave me an answer, and no one ever had the guts to even level up or fess up, 10, 15, 20 years later. So that's that piece that was it's never gone away, the gnawing, why'd you throw me out? Did you just hate me? Because at one point they loved me. They couldn't get enough of me.
I wasn't aware of this story, so I'm curious about it for that reason. But the other reason why I'm curious about it is because when you talk about that niggling why question, why me? Why I don't get it. I didn't do anything wrong. Why did I get singled out? Why did I get rejected? And that's something that I relate to. That I don't for years I was struggling with that question of why was I singled out? Why were people thinking the worst things about me when I literally did nothing wrong? What? And living with that why question has led me down some really interesting paths. And I'm curious to know if that niggling why question has led you down some interesting, unexpected paths.
Yes, although I back to you for a hot minute, because I feel like one therapy session, then someone should have set you straight. It's not you. It's the public that is insatiable. And if it weren't you, it'd be somebody else who is pretty and young and maybe didn't act exactly like everybody assumes you need to act. And therefore, what a story. So I hope that someone disabused you quickly of it being you and what was wrong with you. There was nothing wrong with you. It's the awfulness of us. That's what was wrong. Do you know what I mean? And I mean us, meaning the public, the media, all of us. We're the ones who were what was wrong. And I am assuming at this point in your life, you believe that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that. And I certainly do not blame myself for the choices that other people made, right?
Yeah.
I do not blame myself for the fact that the prosecutor targeted me or the police, arrested me, or that, the media turned me into this insane caricature of a person that was really a projection of their own fantasies. I think one of the nice sort of silver lining takeaways from my experience is how not personal it was, in the sense that it had nothing to do with me.
Correct.
There's a lot of stuff that got projected onto me because I was a convenient name and face and situation for people to do that. So I don't take that personally. However, I do know that, I have wondered, okay, sure, I understand all the crazy, the press and all around the world and the public, but why the specific people in Perugia at the time? Why did they automatically assume that the break-in was not real and therefore that someone in the house was involved? Why did they just assume that to be their intuition to be right? Or why did they think that I was capable of, or another question that I have is when the evidence did come forward proving who actually committed this crime, why did they keep going after me?
Yes.
And I don't believe it's because they're evil people who don't care if I'm innocent or not. They thought that they were doing the right thing based upon their own weird cognitive biases. But that's been a long, interesting journey for me to try to figure out. It's led me to study psychology. It's led me to talk to my prosecutor and ask him why,
Wow.
Just ask him directly.
I hope you recorded that.
I talk about it in my new book, which is going to be coming out. So I hope we can talk about that in the future. But all of this to say that even knowing that something isn't personal it's not enough,
It's not
right?
enough.
And I think the thing that's really interesting
I know.
for you is these were people that you knew and who knew you. Like that's another level of hurt and rejection, because at the very least, like the police didn't know me from Adam. Like I was just the roommate who happened to call the police, and then they sort of had their own weird fantasies and put them onto me. But these were people that you knew, that you worked with, that you clearly felt like you belonged to this group of people, and then that turned out to be not. And so I'm curious to know, like, how you have,
How much niggling I did
and how
to
much
figure.
niggling, but also how much, like, how have you processed not having an answer to that question?
It's a great question, because honestly, all I did was niggle away, trying to get to to the grail. And I think eventually what I determined was, this is painful. You can continue to wind yourself up every day and feel crappy, or you can just move on and say, that happened. And so maybe it's a cop-out, maybe it's self-preservation, I don't know, but whatever it wasn't getting anywhere, and it seemed like it was insanity over and over again to continue that path. And then I look back at sort of the friendships, right? The people I worked with, my whole show team, and I stayed with them. Like we are all still very tight. That team from back then, ends up being my besties in sort of America, in the East Coast of America. And I've got my besties from home in Canada. I've got some besties from Texas where I emigrated. And then I've got these besties, and they stayed besties. So maybe that assuaged the whole notion that I got dumped, because I only got partially dumped. I got dumped by the parents of the lover.
Okay,
that kind of thing.
And you had to forge your own path again, but did you feel like you could trust being a part of anything after that?
No, I never did. But I think that trust part probably went out the window with a boyfriend of 6 years who cheated on me with an assistant of his for a year and a half.
Gross.
And this was someone I was getting married to. It was my first, serious live together, plan a marriage, love of my life. And such a good person too. This is the weird part. This was the best, most moral person I'd ever met. I wanted to model myself after him because he always did the right thing and I was always cutting corners. And so to have somebody so righteous and moral do something so immoral and painful, trust went out with that. And I don't think I ever really recovered it. So I've always sort of lived a little with the shield, my adult life with the shield of reality. And I'm not sure if that's a shield of reality because maybe it isn't for everybody. But I have lived with that shield for every relationship, and that's personal or professional.
I think a really good lesson, especially as someone who covers, crime and true crime and how people are hurting people, it doesn't have to be a psychopath to hurt somebody. You can be an otherwise good person who makes a very hurtful decision for whatever reason that you make that hurtful decision. And you hope that how much can you read into that decision?
Well, you know what? Is a great expression for that. Sometimes good people do bad things. And it's why our justice system is so, I hate to say flexible, but it is flexible. It's not one standard fits all. That's why one murderer gets 5 years of probation and one murderer gets death penalty.
Right.
There are different versions of mens rea, which is what your criminal intent is, right? And that's literally the term that's used. What's the mens rea here? What was in your head? Is this first degree you intended? Is this second degree you were shocked and you acted out? You didn't even know what you were doing? Is this something even less than you were in self-defense? It's not even murder. We look at and then we sentence differently too, even on the same charges. So I think we look at people, we look at their backgrounds. And again, good people can do bad things and their goodness comes in to the sentencing, cake when you're mixing it.
Trust is an issue. Is that something that's important to you? Do you feel like you need trust in your life, or is trust overrated?
I need a super yacht in my life. And I treat trust the same way. It's a luxury.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. You have 2 kids. How do you just talk about trust with them?
That's a really good question. It's funny because you're going to find this as you wind your way through these bizarre developments and little ones. One of my kids was a constant shit disturber.
Okay.
He would steal the cookie. He'd say, wasn't me, and the other one was just brutally honest from being a toddler. And I remember, and the younger one was the one that was all brutally honest all the time. And I remember something going missing from the counter. And I said, Ridley, did you take that cookie or whatever it was? Fully expecting that this was just a fool's errand to even bother asking. But I thought, well, it's your job. You got it, And he looked up at me and he goes,
Yeah.
And I thought, what just happened? So I think they're teaching me more about that than I maybe was teaching them about the sort of the notions of trusting what you hear. And we always talk about, I think the big lesson, and this goes for you too as a mom, is that your mom, 99.99 repeating times out of 10, is giving you information, advice, or counsel not for her benefit. She's not getting anything out of it. There is nothing in it for me. So it's not a transaction. When your mom is giving you counsel, advice, help, coaching, coaxing, all the above, there's nothing in it for mom. And they are starting to realize that now in their teens. Most of the time they'll blow you off leave me alone.
Yeah, why are you bothering me? You're so annoying.
Idiot.
Yeah.
You're so
You're trying
annoying.
to boss me around all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so eventually they do come around to that, oh yeah, this is a major pain in the butt for her to reach out to me, to come visit me, to do these things, and then to impart these wisdoms, to send me the email, to copy me on the Insta post that's amazing and inspirational. There's nothing in it for me other than the joy of seeing them be great.
Yeah, and thrive.
And so that's a big trusting thing too. I think they trust me a hell of a lot more now than when I told them, don't put that in your mouth, it'll kill you.
Yeah, I'm still at the stage where my kids trust me because they're 3 and 1 and they have no other reason. But it's going to be weird when we get to that stage where they reject my suggestions that are born out of mere concern that they be okay.
Don't use hyperbole or histrionics if you're giving them the lesson. Like dumb me, I would say things like, "Don't." That there are people who've died from that. They may have, but the kids look at it as now you're just
yeah, I can't trust you anymore because you've made it something that it's not. You've made a mountain out of a molehill. Yeah, the thing I've been trying to do when I'm thinking about teaching my kids how to experience trust is I've been trying to give them ways of determining for themselves whether or not something is a good idea or it is safe. Like we have a rolling ladder in our home with a library, and we have a toddler and a 1-year-old who love to climb things, and I don't tell them not to climb it. What I tell them is when you're climbing it, every time you take another step, ask yourself if you feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, take a step down. And it's amazing how just like that, not telling them don't, just giving them some advice has led to them not climbing high at all. It's kind of amazing.
You have good kids.
Yeah, fair. I do not have 2 boys.
Amanda, there is not a hope in hell that would work in my house. They were on the roof and I didn't know it.
Testosterone is a hell of a drug. So, okay, here's a question for you. Are you lost right now?
Yeah, always. I'm always lost. we go through these, to quote Taylor Swift, eras, and I'm in the oh my God, you're going to be an old lady soon era, which means in our business, sadly, you are less marketable, you are less sellable, you will likely not get all the jobs that you used to get. Just is the reality that we face. It's never been different. It's been worse for me. Back in the 80s, it was even worse. So I always worry about how you're going to feed yourself. How are you going to pay for college? How are you going to pay for the old age home? How are you going to pay for all that? And that is a sense of constant loss. Like you never have the answer to that. And it is always gnawing at you. And I've not been an idiot in the past either. I've been squirreling away everything I could all the time, but it's never enough to really imagine that you're going to live to 90 or 95. We used to live to 65, right? So we still live 65, 75. And so if you retired at 65, you probably had enough money to live for 5 to 10 years.
Good.
Yeah. 30 years? No. 30 years is probably your whole career, if not a major portion of it. So suddenly you're doubling that. So yeah, I fear survival. I think most people probably do in some way. And the acceptance part never goes away. So
yeah, that's just another rejection.
Yeah. Like when's the next shoe going to drop? That's kind of always circling back there too.
Is that something that people in the business, women in the business, talk about with each other?
Yep. More now, a lot more now. When I was, it was like 30 years ago, I remember there were some women in the newsroom who were just so bitchy and nasty, and forget asking for help. They would give you something that would sink you. And somebody, I wish I could remember who it was because it was such a pearl of wisdom, said, there's plenty of room at the top. It's not a peak, it's a plateau. Lots of room for all of us to stand up there. And the more of us who are there, it's critical mass. So I don't know why we keep knocking people off the edge. And I've always had that visual in my mind. So I actually run a mentoring series, for people in the business or outside the business, like to share their secrets, because I think it's better. Rising tide floats all boats. I called it rising tide. But back then, no. Now, yeah, women do share this stuff. We do talk about it. We talk about it a little differently now because it's not quite as obviously bad as it was. We do work past 40 and now we work past 50, which is
how nice.
Was kind of, yeah, there were court cases for an anchor. I think she was in Michigan, one of the northern states. She had to sue her local broadcaster for firing her because I think she turned 40.
That is insane. I am 37. So
yeah, it's insane, isn't it?
That's insane.
It's insane.
Especially when you think like, oh, okay, I guess it never was about my professionalism or my perspective or my ability to do this job. It was merely the fact that I was a pretty face.
Yeah. And young and,
what a stab in the
desirable.
back.
And I think that never was the case for men. They were always portly and balding, and that gave them gravitas if they were older. If they had gray on their flanks over here and the temples, that made them more believable. And what's so astounding, and this won't come as a shock, is I've never done my best work except for my last 10 years. Like that's the frustration of it, is that, boy, did they ever cut themselves off at the knees by dumping women just as they were really reaching their stride.
Yeah, what's so unbelievable about an older woman? I don't understand that.
Ugh. Well, when we started, like I said, it's better. It's getting better. However, I will say, look at the broadcast landscape. How many men are over 60? How many women?
You're waiting for another train? You're waiting for another rejection?
Yeah, I've been really lucky, thus far to age gracefully in the business. But I don't believe for a minute, I'm no Pollyanna, I don't believe for a minute that can't end in a heartbeat. Because again, just what I see is that there are not many women over 60, but there's loads of men, plenty, so many correspondents, anchors, magazine hosts, all of them. There's tons of them, just not that many women.
So what's your plan? What are you going to do?
Well, that's a good question. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night. Like you said, do you still have that fear of not belonging? And that's one of the things I constantly worry about. So, I'm always sort of trying to develop a side hustle. And then also I think, we all have to assess what do we need to do to downsize everything in life? Expectations, even not just money, but expectations. And so I think there's a lot of mental calculations that you have to make as you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s. I think, because again, we're all living to 90 now. Like there's a lot of living you got to pay for when you maybe aren't as capable of being in a rat race that goes 90 miles an hour.
Right.
I think that's a subject that should be next. I mean, we tackled smoking, we tackled drinking, we tackled sleep. We haven't tackled looking after yourself because you're going to have to. I don't think Social Security is going to do the trick.
Yeah, I'm
around.
nervous about that.
Yeah. So it should be a brand new sort of frontier for us to really plumb. Figure it out, because it's going to figure you out fast, you know?
Or it's going to leave you high and dry. And
yeah.
so how are you figuring it out? Are you writing about this?
Yeah. I'm writing, podcasting, and I still have this great nightly news position at News Nation, which gives me an hour every night to do a genre, which, as you can attest, true crime has this like crazy fascination. Like there is a market for that. People do want to know what's going on. People do want to support victims. Even Crime Con. I don't know if you've ever been.
I've zoomed into a crime con before.
At first, I thought it was really macabre. And then talking to victims and victims' family members, I realized they really feel love and they get love. I mean, it is all about them at Crime Con. And so suddenly I started to get a different perspective on the business, on true crime, and on, I mean, I used to do Crime and Justice and Court TV. Those were trials. That was like the boring, dry aspect of American jurisprudence. But true crime is different. It's magazine, it's storytelling, it's mystery. And that genre has really blown up. And I was like grappling with it, right? For a long time. Like, should we be doing this? Till I realized like how important it actually is for people to have their stories told. They don't want to be left. They don't want to be forgotten. They don't want to be the afterthought in the Ted Bundy headline, you know? And then I realized, yeah, this is important to people.
Is true crime your anchor then?
Pretty much. I mean, by default. You know, I got tossed out of NBC, and in this business, if you get dumped, you're kind of like scarlet letter. Like nobody wants you. Something must have been terrible about her. Don't even touch her. You know, you go from like being able to get the president to answer your call to nobody will answer your call. So I took whatever job was out there, a temp. I took a temp job filling in on Court TV. I didn't know much about Law and Justice at that point. I was a war correspondent and a general beat correspondent, you know, and started to learn so much. I mean, I sat on a set with Jack Ford, who's an amazing broadcaster. You know, he was Today Show, he was Good Morning America, but he is, more importantly, his entire career was as a prosecutor and defense attorney and a Yale law professor. So, and the most magnanimous person I've ever encountered, because he would teach me law for 5 years, sitting on a set with him. And there I was at Court TV following these trials with a Yale law professor basically teaching me on the go. So I fell into it that way. Like you said, somehow you don't know how you end up places. Like, what happened? Why am I here? I never chose true crime.
Yeah.
But because I learned so much and got so good at just the nuts and bolts of it all, that's my jam. I'm an expert, you know, and it's easy. Does that sound right? It's easy to do hard stuff because the hard stuff is already looked after, so I can tackle hard stuff.
Yeah, you know, I find myself in that situation as well, where as much as I don't feel affinity for true crime, it was never something that I ever was interested in, or, you know, I didn't read mystery novels or get into that. I was more of a Harry Potter kind of kid. Because I just know it so much and so well, like I have an informed opinion, and therefore I can be an effective agent in that world around that genre. And I'm actually grateful for that, because I feel like, because I am not a fanatic about true crime, that allows me to bring a perspective to the genre that is valuable. It's not just, you know, glamorizing or whatever it may be. And it's also not like hating it necessarily. Like, I understand the importance of getting it right and doing justice for people through the act of storytelling. I'm curious, how has your background in war correspondence impacted your correspondence in the true crime genre?
Well, they're so different, right? Like there's almost no duplication of skill there, except for listening, which, by the way, is the number one skill in life, let alone being a journalist or a banker or correspondent or podcaster. Just listening. It's important as a friend. It's important as a mom. It's important as a daughter. It's important as a sibling. It's important as an employee. It's listening. That really helped because I nearly died 9/11. I was under the North Tower.
At the time we were there, when the first trade tower came down, my producer and I were overcome by the cloud of debris and smoke that came at us so rapidly. We had to break down a window to an apartment building. We had to break the window and go into the second door inside just to breathe. We were followed by a police officer and a security guard from the World Trade Center area.
I was a victim of 9/11, suddenly going over to the land of where they wanted to make sure I, put the nail in my coffin.
Right.
Going over to the killers. Yeah. And so that was pretty hard to be sympathetic. But the more I listened, the more I began to understand why there is this conflict and that we need to be active participants in solving the conflict. It's not just about taking a sledgehammer to your adversary. It's about fighting smarter, right? Fighting smarter. And that often means figuring out the enemy. And so that really, really helped me in terms of just understanding how important it is to shut up and just take it all in. And weirdly, being thrown into Pakistan and Afghanistan, women aren't allowed to talk a whole lot anyway.
Right.
So I was able to really listen. And then I was also able to get the women's perspective because I remember everybody in America freaking out. Why do those women accept having to wear a burqa? Like the burqa is the most obscene garment in the world. It is far worse than hijab.
Right.
It is far worse than the abaya in Saudi Arabia. It is far worse than the coat and headscarf in Iran. The burqa is one garment that goes over the top and goes all the way down as one piece. And there is barely any way to see out of the mesh because the mesh is thick cotton. It's why their pedestrian deaths are so high among women because they can't see. And all the Americans said, well, why did those women want to wear that thing? Well, ask them. They actually do. And the reason they do is sad. They're afraid of being raped.
Yeah.
They're afraid of being molested. And when they wear the burqa, they're very unappealing. You don't know what's under there. Are you 90 or are you 19? And that was what they said, bar none. They lived in decades of war. They lived in decades of spoils of war. And so for them at that time, taking away their only protection would have been horrible.
Yeah, you need to change the culture. You need to change the raping culture first. Yeah.
Devil's in the details, right? Devil's in the details. Surely they should not be wearing the burqa. I mean, without question, it is a horrendously oppressive thing to make women invisible and to partake zero in society and culture. But for now, it's one of their only defenses.
Gosh, that's horrific.
So I learned that kind of thing, right? By listening and immersing and not just coming in with my perspective, which is get that thing off, Let me teach you how it should be,
And they're like, great, now I'm going to be targeted. Cool.
Yeah. And that's just one tiny example, one anecdote of what I learned in war. I also learned how to, weird, I always had to travel outside of curfew because my show was on in the middle of the night in Afghanistan. So I had to travel during curfew. We were live on location every night. Didn't matter whether the government would allow you out or not. The government didn't even exist. It was just militias everywhere. And most of these militia checkpoints were manned by 16, 17, 18-year-old kids hopped up on heroin with a Kalashnikov. That didn't work very well.
Great.
The Kalashnikov would go off or wouldn't, And so that was a very frightening thing to have to go through every day, multiple times at night. And so I learned that there is this universal language of humor. I learned a few words and expressions in Pashto and in Farsi, depending on who I was talking to. And I set them off on their heels because they couldn't figure out, what is this? What's going on? You know, I would say funny things to them at the checkpoint, and then they would just be off their kilter and not continue on the path, which was menacing and threatening and controlling. And I got us out of a lot of pickles that way, which I found to be funny, but I also realized it was very insightful that, hey, this works. No matter who you're dealing with, it really can work.
I'm curious to know, because you have felt lost for so long, does any part of you feel like, is it a mistake to think that anyone isn't lost, or is this a particular thing that has to do with you?
No, I think we're all lost. Nobody has the answers, right? It's why churches are so popular, and all religions. I think, Amanda, honestly, the way to manage your feeling, and this is my perspective, the way to manage our feeling of being lost is how big a piece of that feeling are you going to give in your day, in your life, right? It's always going to be there. You're always going to realize it's just you, right? You're born alone, you die alone. Along the way, you will have partners and loves and friends and all these people who assuage it. But eventually you come back to being like, damn, it really is me. So it's really just a matter of managing how big that piece is going to be in how you prosecute your life. And so if you can keep it in its manageable space, don't ignore it because it is real, then I think we'll probably all do just fine, because nothing's perfect.
How do you have faith that anything that you do will have the intended result that you want?
No, you never will. You can't know that. Otherwise, I'd have invested in Apple so long ago that I wouldn't need to be working at all. You will never know the intended result of your action. You can use best practices. You can use foundational knowledge. You can, risk assessment and aversion. You can do all those wonderful things, and still we break our leg, and still complete horseshoes come in and knock us in the head, like happened to you.
Sure.
You can never know. All you can do is be best prepared and calm, and try to keep your head on straight when that horseshoe does come, if it does come. And if you don't have any horseshoes that have hit you in the head, live in that gratitude of being so lucky. Because there are so many people who go through what you went through, completely unfair, and not because of anything that they ever invited.
I mean, I ask because I'm curious to know how you don't feel paralyzed by the fact that there's so little that you can control.
Sure, I felt paralyzed. I think in my 20s and 30s and 40s, probably into my 50s too. I have felt that paralysis. It didn't help. It didn't do anything for me. It didn't yield a good result. All it did was make me feel bad, which is that personal management aspect, I say, of that piece that exists within all of us, which is you are alone. Don't kid yourself. You're alone. Anybody at any time can turn on you. And that is a sad, sad reality. Most people who have had blissful marriages, they assume it's impossible for it to happen to them. Well, it isn't. And I think what you do is you just keep that piece in a manageable space in your life. Allow yourself to visit it. Allow it to visit you. Do not dwell. Do not allow the paralysis to take over. Realize that there are so many other aspects of living that are great, right? They really are. The more you dwell on what you can't control, and the more you dwell on what feels terrible and feels lonely, the less you're experiencing all the magic. You're missing it. It was next door. So keep that in its silo. Keep the silo alive because it is real and it is there. Don't pretend. That's not healthy. But have a healthy relationship with that silo, a small, healthy relationship with that loneliness and with that loss of control or lack of control. And don't forget to smell the effing roses because they're really great. Those roses are great.
Do you trust yourself?
Not always. No. Again, I look at it as a calculated, everything is a calculated transaction, right? It's a risk assessment and a risk aversion, and do I 100% trust? No, because I'm fallible. We're all fallible. I ski downhill.
Okay.
Very fast and very aggressively. It's probably a good metaphor for my life. I could easily catch an edge, hit something, and be finished, dead or finished with the love of my life, which is downhill skiing. But I do it. And I do calculate each hill, and I do calculate each knoll, and I do calculate when am I going to pull it back, when I'm not. But I am absolutely going to ski, and I am going to ski fast, and that'll never change. And it's a little like life. I'm absolutely going to do it. Do I trust myself 100%? No, I could fall flat on my face. Richard Branson says it best. If you want people to remember your face, you better be willing to fall on it. And I kind of live by that.
You can watch Ashleigh Banfield's self-titled show weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern on News Nation, or check out her podcast, Drop Dead Serious, wherever you listen.
In the meantime, get lost with us. Find us on Bluesky at amandaknox.com.
At wisecracker.bsky.social.
You can help support our work just by following or subscribing to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp, our assistant producer is Charlie Darnell, and our theme music is by Josh Budo Karp.